The flames of the oil lamp danced menacingly close to Katherine Kane's face as Sheriff Dawson held it inches from her skin, the heat making her eyes water and her breath catch in her throat. It was 1878 in the dusty town of Copper Creek, Wyoming Territory, and Katherine had just committed the unforgivable sin of accidentally spilling whiskey on the sheriff's new leather boots while serving drinks at the Silver Dollar Saloon. "You clumsy little wench," Sheriff Dawson snarled, his alcohol-laced breath hitting her face as surely as his hand had moments before. "Maybe a little heat will teach you some grace." Katherine trembled, her 22 years of life suddenly feeling very short as the flame inched closer to her cheek. The patrons of the saloon watched in silence, no one brave enough to stand against the notoriously cruel sheriff. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the pain, when a deep voice cut through the tense atmosphere. "No more flames near her, Sheriff." The saloon fell silent as boots thudded heavily across the wooden floor. Katherine opened her eyes to see a tall man she'd never laid eyes on before, dressed in trail-worn clothes with a gun belt slung low on his hips. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the hard set of his jaw and the determined look in his eyes. "This ain't your business, stranger," Sheriff Dawson spat, though Katherine noticed his hand trembled slightly, causing the flame to dance erratically. The stranger didn't flinch. "I'm making it my business." He took another step forward, his hand hovering near his holster. "A man who'd burn a woman for spilling a drink isn't fit to wear that badge." Katherine watched as the two men faced off, the entire saloon holding its collective breath. She didn't know who this stranger was, but in that moment, he was her only hope against Dawson's cruelty. Sheriff Dawson's eyes darted around the room, taking in the faces of the patrons, many of whom were now looking at him with clear disapproval. With a curse, he lowered the lamp. "You're new in town," he growled at the stranger. "You won't be staying long." The stranger's expression didn't change. "We'll see about that." As Dawson stormed out, slamming the saloon doors behind him, Katherine felt her knees buckle with relief. The stranger was immediately at her side, one strong hand steadying her elbow. "You all right, miss?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Katherine nodded, trying to regain her composure. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Lawson. Lucas Lawson," he replied, removing his hat to reveal sandy brown hair and the kindest blue eyes Katherine had ever seen. "Katherine Kane," she responded, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look with her hair falling loose from its pins and her cheek still red from Dawson's slap. "I'm in your debt, Mr. Lawson." Lucas shook his head. "No man worth his salt would stand by and let that happen." He glanced toward the door. "But that sheriff's going to be trouble." "He always is," Katherine sighed, straightening her apron. "He owns half the town and terrorizes the rest." She tried to smile, but her lip quivered. "You probably shouldn't have made an enemy of him your first day in town." Lucas's gaze softened. "Some things are worth standing up for, Miss Kane." The saloon owner, Mr. Harris, hurried over. "Katherine, take the rest of the night off. That was a nasty business." He turned to Lucas. "And you, Mr. Drinks on the house." Lucas tipped his hat in acknowledgement but kept his eyes on Katherine. "May I walk you home, Miss Kane? I'd feel better knowing you got there safely." Katherine hesitated only briefly before nodding. Something about Lucas Lawson made her feel safe, and after what had just happened, safety was exactly what she needed. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Katherine was acutely aware of Lucas's solid presence beside her. He walked with the easy confidence of a man who'd seen his share of trouble but wasn't looking to find more. In the silvery moonlight, she could see he was older than her, perhaps 30, with fine lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into distant horizons. "What brings you to Copper Creek, Mr. Lawson?" she asked as they made their way down the main street. "Looking for work," he replied simply. "I've been driving cattle most of my life, but I'm aiming to settle somewhere for a while. Not much cattle work around here anymore," Katherine said. "The railroad changed everything a few years back." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "I noticed, but a man with two good hands can usually find something." They walked in companionable silence for a few moments before Katherine spoke again. "What you did back there?" Most men wouldn't have dared cross Sheriff Dawson. Then most men around here have forgotten what it means to be a man, Lucas said, his voice carrying a hint of steel. My pa always said a real man protects those who can't protect themselves. Catherine's small house came into view at the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a modest one-room cabin with a vegetable garden out front, but it was hers, left to her by her grandmother after her parents died of fever when she was 16. "This is me," she said, stopping at the gate. Lucas surveyed the house with an appreciative eye. "Nice place, you live here alone," Katherine nodded. "Since my grandmother passed 3 years ago." She hesitated, then added, "It's not much, but it's mine free and clear, one of the few properties in town Dawson doesn't have his hooks in." Lucas's expression darkened. "That explains a bit. Men like Dawson can't stand what they can't control." "I've refused to sell to him 5 times now," Katherine said with a hint of pride. "Each time his offers get nastier." "Be careful, Miss Kane," Lucas warned. "Men like that don't take kindly to being refused. I've managed so far." Katherine summoned a smile. "Thank you again for your help tonight, Mr. Lawson." Lucas tipped his hat. "Lucas, please." "Then you must call me Katherine," she replied, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the lingering sensation of the oil lamp's flame. "Katherine," he repeated, her name sounding somehow different in his deep voice. "I hope to see you again." "You will," she promised. Copper Creek isn't big enough to avoid anyone for long. As Lucas walked away, Katherine watched his retreating figure until it disappeared into the darkness. For the first time in years, she felt a flutter of something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. But along with it came anxiety. Sheriff Dawson wasn't a man to forget a slight, and Lucas Lawson had humiliated him in front of the entire saloon. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Katherine rose early as usual to tend her garden before heading to her other job at Mrs. Bennett's general store. As she pulled weeds from around her tomato plants, she found her thoughts drifting to Lucas Lawson and his kindness the previous night. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across her garden. "Miss Kane." Katherine looked up, startled to find Lucas standing at her gate, hat in hand. He was even more handsome in the morning light, his features sharp and clear. "Mr. Lawson," she said, quickly getting to her feet and brushing dirt from her skirt. "Lucas, this is a surprise." "I hope it's a welcome one," he said with a small smile. "I wanted to make sure you were all right after last night." "I'm fine, thank you," she gestured to the garden, "just tending to my vegetables before work." Lucas nodded, his eyes taking in the neat rows of plants. "You've got a good setup here. My ma used to keep a garden like this back in Texas." "You're from Texas?" Katherine asked, opening the gate to invite him in. "Born and raised," Lucas confirmed, stepping into the yard. "Left after the war when there wasn't much left of our ranch." His expression clouded briefly before he continued. "Been moving around ever since, following the herds north in the summer, south in the winter." "That sounds like a lonely life," Katherine observed softly. Lucas's eyes met hers. "It can be, but a man does what he must." Katherine found herself wanting to know more about this quiet, confident cowboy who had appeared in her life so suddenly. "Would you like some coffee? I was about to make a pot before heading to the store." Lucas hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that if it's no trouble." "None at all," Katherine assured him, leading the way inside. Her cabin was small but neat, with a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, a chest for her clothes, and a narrow bed in the corner. Colorful quilts and a few carefully preserved books were her only luxuries. "It's not much," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's a home," Lucas replied simply, and something in his tone told Katherine he understood the value of such a thing. As Katherine prepared the coffee, Lucas studied a framed tintype on her small shelf. "Your family?" Katherine glanced over. "Yes, my parents and grandmother. That was taken a year before my parents died." "I'm sorry," Lucas said quietly. "It was a long time ago," Katherine replied, though the pain had never truly left her. "My grandmother raised me taught me to be independent. She always said a woman shouldn't have to depend on anyone for her survival." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Wise woman. Still, there's a difference between needing someone and choosing to share your life with them." The simple statement lingered in the air between them as Katherine poured 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Lucas, their fingers brushing briefly, sending an unexpected tingle up her arm. They sat at her small table, talking easily as the morning sun streamed through the windows. Lucas told her about growing up on a cattle ranch, about the war that had taken his father and older brother, and about his years drifting from job to job afterward. "And you?" he asked. "Have you always lived in Copper Creek?" Katherine nodded. "Born and raised, just like you in Texas." "My father was a carpenter, built most of the newer buildings in town, including this cabin." "You never thought of leaving, seeing other places?" Lucas asked. Katherine smiled wistfully. "Sometimes, but after my parents died, grandmother needed me. And then after she passed, I had the house and my jobs." She shrugged. "Life has a way of keeping you in one place." "That it does," Lucas agreed. He finished his coffee and stood reluctantly. "I should let you get to work, don't want to make you late. Where are you staying?" Katherine asked as she walked him to the door. "Got a room at the boarding house for now," Lucas replied. "Planning to talk to some of the ranchers outside town today, see if anyone's hiring." "Try the Foster place first," Katherine suggested. "Old Mr. Foster is fair, and I heard they lost a hand last month." Lucas tipped his hat. "I appreciate the advice." He paused at the door. "Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you again, Katherine?" Katherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I'd like that very much." With a smile that transformed his serious face, Lucas nodded. "Then I will. Good day, Katherine." As she watched him walk away for the second time, Katherine felt a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. But her happiness was short-lived as she spotted Sheriff Dawson leaning against a post across the street, watching Lucas with narrowed eyes. The encounter with Dawson the previous night was far from over, she realized with a sinking feeling. It had only just begun, the morning at Mrs. Bennett's general store passed in a blur of customers and inventory. Katherine helped restock shelves, measured fabric for Mrs. Miller's new curtains, and wrapped packages of sugar and coffee for the widow Jones. All the while, her mind kept drifting to Lucas Lawson and his unexpected visit. "You're a million miles away today, Katherine," Mrs. Bennett observed as they ate a simple lunch of bread and cheese in the back room. The older woman had been a friend of Katherine's grandmother and had given Katherine the job when times were hard after her parents' deaths. "I'm sorry," Katherine said, embarrassed to be caught daydreaming. Mrs. Bennett's shrewd eyes softened. "It wouldn't have anything to do with that handsome stranger who stood up to Dawson last night, would it? Word travels fast in Copper Creek." Katherine couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "He came by this morning. His name is Lucas Lawson from Texas." "A cowboy, then," Mrs. Bennett nodded approvingly. "And by that smile, I'd say he made quite an impression." "He was kind," Katherine said simply. "It's been a while since anyone in this town showed much kindness." Mrs. Bennett's expression grew serious. "Be careful, dear. Not just of the stranger, though Lord knows a drifting cowboy can break hearts as easily as he can rope cattle, but of Dawson. He was in here earlier, asking questions about your new friend." Katherine's happiness dimmed. "What kind of questions?" "Where he's from, what he's doing here. I told him I didn't know anything, which was the truth at the time." Mrs. Bennett reached across the table to pat Katherine's hand. "Dawson's not a man to cross, especially over a spilled drink." "It wasn't about the drink," Katherine said quietly. "It's because I won't sell him my grandmother's house. He wants all the property on that side of town for some scheme or another." "All the more reason to watch your step," Mrs. Bennett warned. "And to be careful who you associate with. This Lucas Lawson might be a fine man, but he's already on Dawson's bad side." Katherine knew Mrs. Bennett was right, but something in her rebelled against the idea of letting Dawson dictate her life any more than he already did. "I can't just live in fear of him forever." "No," Mrs. Bennett agreed with a sigh, "but you can be smart about it." The afternoon crawled by, each chime of the door making Katherine look up in hope of seeing Lucas, but he didn't appear. By closing time, she had convinced herself that he had probably already moved on, despite his words that morning. Men like Lucas Lawson rarely stayed in one place for long. As she locked up the store and started the walk home, The setting sun painted Copper Creek in shades of gold and amber. The dusty main street was relatively quiet, with only a few townsfolk hurrying to finish their business before nightfall. Katherine was nearly halfway home when she heard the unmistakable sound of horses behind her. Turning, she saw Sheriff Dawson and two of his deputies approaching on horseback. Her heart sank as they slowed to a stop beside her. "Evening, Miss Kane," Dawson said, his tone falsely pleasant. "Walking home all alone." "As I do every day, Sheriff," Katherine replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Dawson dismounted, handing his reins to one of his deputies. "Allow me to escort you the rest of the way. These streets aren't always safe after dark." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on Katherine. The only danger she currently faced was standing right in front of her. "That's not necessary," she said firmly. "I know my way." Dawson stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I insist, we have things to discuss." Katherine took a step back, but Dawson caught her arm in a grip tight enough to bruise. "Your grandmother's property, for instance." "I'm raising my offer to $300. That's more than generous for a rundown cabin." "It's not for sale, Sheriff," Katherine said, trying to pull away. "Not at any price." Dawson's face darkened. "Everything has a price, Katherine, everyone too." His grip tightened. "Including that drifter who thinks he can waltz into my town and tell me how to conduct my business." Fear shot through Katherine, not for herself but for Lucas. "Leave him out of this, he was just being decent." "Decent," Dawson laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "There's nothing decent about him. You know what I found out today? He was run out of 3 towns in Colorado. Gambling debts, they say, maybe worse." Katherine shook her head, unwilling to believe it. "You're lying." "Am I?" Dawson sneered. "Ask him yourself if he's still around tomorrow." Men like that don't stay put for long, especially when they discover the local law knows their history. Before Katherine could respond, a voice called out from across the street. "Everything all right there, Miss Kane?" Both Katherine and Dawson turned to see Mr. Peterson, the blacksmith, watching them with concern. His massive arms were crossed over his chest, and his normally genial expression was replaced by a stern frown. Dawson immediately released Katherine's arm, his demeanor shifting to casual politeness. "Just escorting Miss Kane home safely, Peterson. No need for concern." "I can see to myself from here, thank you, Sheriff," Katherine said firmly, seizing the opportunity. Dawson's eyes flashed with anger, but with Mr. Peterson watching, he merely tipped his hat. "Think about my offer, Miss Kane. It won't stay open forever." He remounted his horse, adding in a voice only she could hear, "Neither will your options." As the sheriff and his deputies rode away, Mr. Peterson crossed the street to Katherine. "You all right, Miss Kane?" That looked unpleasant. Katherine rubbed her arm where Dawson's fingers had dug in. "I'm fine, Mr. Peterson. Thank you for intervening." The blacksmith's expression was troubled. "Dawson's been getting bolder lately. You be careful. Want me to walk you the rest of the way home?" "No, thank you," Katherine said with a grateful smile. "I'm almost there and I could use the time to clear my head." Mr. Peterson nodded reluctantly. "If you're sure, but if you ever need help, my door's always open. Martha and I think the world of you, you know that." "I know, and I appreciate it," Katherine assured him before continuing on her way. The encounter with Dawson had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Was he telling the truth about Lucas? Could the kind man who had defended her be running from a checkered past as she approached her home? Katherine was so lost in thought that she almost missed the figure sitting on her front steps. Her heart leapt to her throat until she recognized Lucas's familiar silhouette in the gathering dusk. "Lucas," she breathed, relief flooding through her. He stood as she approached, hat in hand. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to tell you that Mr. Foster hired me on." "Your recommendation made all the difference." "That's wonderful news," Katherine said, genuinely pleased despite her lingering doubts. Lucas studied her face in the fading light. "Something's wrong." "What happened?" Katherine hesitated, but Lucas's direct gaze made it impossible to dissemble. "I ran into Sheriff Dawson on my way home. He said things about you." Lucas's expression hardened. "What kind of things?" "That you were run out of towns in Colorado. Gambling debts," he said. Katherine watched his face carefully. "Is it true?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. Finally, he sighed. Some of it. I had a bad run after the war, lost my way for a while, got into gambling, made some mistakes. Catherine's heart sank, so Dawson was telling the truth. Not entirely, Lucas said firmly. I was never run out of anywhere. I left of my own accord when I realized the path I was on. Been straight for 5 years now. He took a step closer. Katherine, I'm not proud of my past, but I've never lied to you about who I am. Katherine wanted to believe him. Everything in her heart told her to trust this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, but Dawson's warning echoed in her mind. Why did you really come to Copper Creek? She asked softly. Exactly what I told you, looking for work, a place to settle for a while. Lucas's eyes were earnest. I had no idea I'd find someone like you. The sincerity in his voice made Catherine's resolve waver. Dawson won't let this go. He wants my land, and now he's got a grudge against you too. I've faced worse than men like Dawson, Lucas said, his voice steady. The question is, can you trust me, knowing what you know now? Katherine looked at this man who had defended her without knowing her, who had been honest about his flaws when he could have lied. In that moment, she made her choice. Would you like to come in for supper? She asked softly. It's nothing fancy, just some stew I made yesterday. The smile that lit up Lucas's face was answer enough. I'd be honored. As they stepped inside, Katherine knew she was taking a risk, but for the first time in years, it felt like a risk worth taking. The next few weeks passed in a blur of changing seasons and changing hearts. September gave way to October, bringing crisp mornings and golden afternoons to Copper Creek. Lucas settled into his job at the Foster Ranch, earning respect for his hard work and skill with horses. Every evening after work, he would stop by Katherine's house, sometimes bringing wildflowers or a rabbit he'd caught for their supper. They fell into an easy rhythm together, sharing meals and stories as autumn deepened around them. Katherine found herself looking forward to the sound of his boots on her porch steps each evening, her heart lightening at the sight of his smile. Lucas, for his part, seemed to bloom under Katherine's gentle attention. The guarded look that had often shadowed his eyes began to fade, replaced by a warmth that made her breath catch whenever he looked at her. You're good for him, Mrs. Bennett observed one afternoon as they watched Lucas across the street, loading supplies into a wagon for the Foster Ranch. I haven't seen a man stand that tall in years, Katherine blushed. We're just friends, Mrs. Bennett raised an eyebrow. Friends who spend every evening together, the whole town's talking, dear. Let them talk, Katherine said, though her cheeks burned hotter. It's nothing improper. I didn't say it was, Mrs. Bennett replied with a knowing smile. But it's something, sure enough. It was something, Katherine admitted to herself, something that grew stronger with each passing day despite the shadow that Sheriff Dawson cast over their budding relationship. Though he hadn't directly confronted them again, Katherine often caught sight of him watching them from afar, his eyes cold with calculation. On a particularly fine Saturday in mid-October, Lucas invited Katherine to ride out to a spot he'd discovered near the Foster Ranch. It's not far, he promised, and Mr. Foster said I could borrow 2 horses for the day. A picnic, Katherine asked, delighted by the idea. If you'll pack it, Lucas agreed with a grin. I'm afraid my cooking skills begin and end with coffee and bacon. I think I can manage something more appetizing, Katherine laughed. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for riding. Lucas arrived at Katherine's door promptly at 9, leading 2 horses, a steady bay gelding for himself and a gentle dun mare for Katherine. She's called Daisy, Lucas said as he helped Katherine mount. Old Mr. Foster says she's got the sweetest disposition of any horse he's owned. Katherine settled into the saddle, adjusting her skirts. It had been years since she'd ridden, not since before her grandmother fell ill, but the familiar feeling came back quickly. She's lovely. Lucas mounted his own horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. Ready. They rode out of town side by side, Katherine acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk as they passed. By now, everyone in Copper Creek knew of the growing friendship between Katherine Kane and the newcomer Cowboy who'd stood up to Sheriff Dawson. Some, like Mrs. Bennett, approved. Others whispered behind their hands about Catherine's reputation and Lucas's mysterious past. In that moment, with the October sun warming her face and Lucas riding tall beside her, Katherine found she didn't care what anyone thought. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. They followed a narrow trail through rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen, the latter blazing gold against the blue sky. Lucas pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his first weeks working at the ranch, making Katherine laugh with tales of a particularly stubborn mule and Mr. Foster's colorful vocabulary. After about an hour's ride, they crested a hill and Katherine gasped at the view. Below them stretched a small valley with a clear stream running through it, bordered by aspen trees in full autumn glory. The grass was still green near the water, creating a perfect natural garden. "Lucas, it's beautiful," she breathed. He smiled, pleased by her reaction. "I found it last week while tracking some strays. Thought you might like to see it." They dismounted near the stream, tethering the horses where they could graze on the sweet grass. Lucas spread a blanket in a sunny spot while Katherine unpacked the picnic she'd prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and a jar of sweet tea. "This is a feast," Lucas said appreciatively as they settled on the blanket. "Nothing special," Katherine demurred. Though she'd spent the previous evening cooking with special care, they ate and talked, the conversation flowing as easily as the stream beside them. Lucas told her more about his life before Copper Creek, his childhood on the ranch, the devastating impact of the war, his aimless years afterward. "I'm not proud of the man I was then," he admitted, his eyes on the distant hills. "Angry, reckless. Gambling was just a way to feel something, I suppose." "What changed?" Katherine asked gently. Lucas was quiet for a moment. "I nearly killed a man in a fight over cards, would have if others hadn't pulled me off him." He looked down at his hands. "Spent a night in jail, and when I sobered up, I could see clear as day what I'd become. Decided then and there to make a change." He turned to Katherine, his eyes sincere. "That's why what Dawson said was only half true. I did have gambling debts, but I worked to pay every cent back before I left Colorado. No one ran me out. I chose to leave, to start fresh somewhere my reputation wouldn't follow me." Katherine reached out to cover his hand with hers. "Thank you for telling me the truth." Lucas turned his hand to clasp hers. "I want you to know who I am, Katherine, all of it, good and bad." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Katherine was acutely aware of the warmth of his hand, the intensity in his blue eyes. "Lucas," she began, not quite sure what she wanted to say. Before she could find the words, a distant gunshot echoed through the valley, startling them both. Their horses snorted nervously, pulling at their tethers. Lucas was on his feet immediately, his hand going to the gun at his hip as he scanned their surroundings. "Probably just hunters," he said, though his posture remained tense. A second shot, closer this time, had Katherine standing as well. "Maybe we should head back," she suggested, uneasy despite the peaceful setting. Lucas nodded reluctantly. "Might be wise. Shame to cut the day short, though." They packed up quickly, and Lucas helped Katherine back onto Daisy's back. As they prepared to leave, 3 riders appeared at the far end of the valley. Even at a distance, Katherine recognized Sheriff Dawson's distinctive hat and the glint of his badge. "Dawson," Lucas muttered, his expression darkening. "What's he doing out here?" Katherine asked, anxiety tightening her chest. "Nothing good," Lucas replied grimly. "Stay close to me." They rode to meet the approaching men, Lucas positioning himself slightly in front of Katherine in a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. As the two groups drew closer, Katherine saw that Dawson was accompanied by his 2 most loyal deputies, both men with reputations nearly as unsavory as their boss. "Well, well," Dawson called as they came within speaking distance. "Quite the cozy little picnic you've got here. Bit far from town for a respectable woman, isn't it, Miss Kane?" "We were just heading back," Katherine replied coolly, determined not to show her unease. Dawson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny coincidence running into you out here. Almost like someone told me where you'd be." Lucas's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Dawson?" "Just doing my job, keeping an eye on things," the sheriff replied with false innocence. making sure Miss Kane here is safe in the company of a known troublemaker. The only trouble I see is wearing a badge it doesn't deserve, Lucas said, his voice low and dangerous. Dawson's expression hardened. Careful, Lawson. I've been asking around about you. Seems you left quite a trail of problems behind you in Colorado. Ancient history, Lucas replied evenly. Maybe, Dawson conceded with a shrug. But a man's past has a way of catching up to him. His gaze shifted to Katherine. Shame if a decent woman got caught in the crossfire. The threat was thinly veiled, and Lucas's hand drifted closer to his gun. Sensing the mounting tension, Katherine spoke up quickly. We really should be getting back to town, Sheriff. Mrs. Bennett is expecting me to help with inventory this afternoon. Dawson studied her for a long moment before nodding. By all means, we'll even escort you. Can't be too careful these days. Lucas looked ready to object, but Katherine caught his eye with a small shake of her head. Challenging Dawson further would only escalate the situation. With obvious reluctance, Lucas nodded his agreement. The ride back to town was tense and largely silent, with Dawson and his deputies flanking Katherine and Lucas like prison guards escorting inmates. When they reached the edge of Copper Creek, Dawson finally spoke again. Think about what I said, Miss Kane, about a man's past catching up to him. He tipped his hat with mock politeness. And my offer for your property stands, though I should warn you the price tends to go down when there's trouble attached to it. With that parting shot, he and his deputies rode off toward the sheriff's office, leaving Katherine and Lucas at the edge of town. I'm sorry, Lucas said quietly once they were alone. I never meant to bring trouble to your door. Katherine turned to him, determined to be brave. You didn't. Dawson was trouble long before you arrived. She managed a small smile, and despite his interference, I had a wonderful morning. The tension in Lucas's shoulders eased slightly. So did I. He hesitated, then added, Katherine, maybe it would be better if I didn't call on you for a while. Give Dawson time to lose interest. Is that what you want? Katherine asked, her heart sinking. Lucas's eyes met hers, honest and clear. No, but I don't want to make things harder for you either. Lucas Lawson, Katherine said firmly, if you think I'm going to let Sheriff Dawson dictate who I spend my time with, you don't know me very well yet. A slow smile spread across Lucas's face, warming his eyes. I'd like the chance to know you better. Good, Katherine replied, her own smile matching his. Because I feel the same way. As they rode the rest of the way to Katherine's house, she knew they had just crossed an invisible line. Whatever had been growing between them, these past weeks had just put down deeper roots, and despite the shadow Dawson cast, Katherine couldn't bring herself to regret it. Halloween came to Copper Creek with pumpkins on porches and children planning their costumes for the harvest festival at the church. Katherine found herself busier than ever at both the saloon and Mrs. Bennett's store, but still she made time each evening for Lucas's visits. These evenings had become the highlight of her days. Sometimes they simply sat on her porch, talking as the stars appeared overhead. Other times, Lucas would help her with small repairs around the house, fixing a loose board in the porch steps, patching a leak in the roof before winter set in. On Sundays, they attended church together, ignoring the whispers and stares from some of the townsfolk. Sheriff Dawson, meanwhile, had been surprisingly quiet since their encounter in the valley. Katherine occasionally caught sight of him watching them from across the street, but he made no further approaches about her property, nor did he harass Lucas directly. The apparent reprieve made Katherine nervous rather than relieved. She knew Dawson well enough to suspect he was simply biding his time. A week before the harvest festival, Lucas arrived at Katherine's door looking unusually serious. What is it? She asked as she ushered him inside from the chilly evening air. Lucas removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. I need to talk to you about something important, Katherine's heart stuttered. Was he leaving? Had Dawson finally found a way to drive him out of town? Of course, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Sit down. Would you like some coffee? Lucas shook his head, remaining standing. No, thank you. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, Katherine. She sat down at the table, bracing herself for bad news. About my future, about what I want. He took a deep breath. For years, I've been drifting, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. But here in Copper Creek, for the first time since before the war, I feel like I've found somewhere I belong. Hope began to replace Catherine's dread. You're staying then? Lucas nodded. If I can. Mr. Foster's offered me a permanent position with a cabin of my own on the property. He hesitated, then added, but that's not the only reason I want to stay. He moved closer, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye to eye. Katherine, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. You've made me want to be a better man, to build something lasting. Katherine's heart raced as Lucas took her hand in his. What are you saying, Lucas? I'm saying that I love you, Katherine Kane, he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you in that saloon, standing up to Dawson even though you were scared. You're the bravest, kindest woman I've ever known. Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. Lucas. I know it might be too soon, he hurried on. And I know there's still the matter of Dawson and whatever he's planning, but I wanted you to know how I feel and to ask. He swallowed hard. To ask if there might be a chance you could feel the same way about me. Katherine reached out to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his weather-worn cheek. I already do, she whispered. I love you too, Lucas. I think I have almost from the beginning. The joy that bloomed across Lucas's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When their lips finally met, Katherine felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The kiss was everything she had dreamed. It might be tender and passionate all at once, a promise of things to come. When they finally parted, both breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. I want to court you properly, Katherine, he said softly, to do right by you. Katherine smiled, her heart full to overflowing. I'd like that very much. They were so wrapped up in each other that neither heard the approaching footsteps until a sharp knock rattled her door. They jumped apart, Katherine smoothing her skirt self-consciously as Lucas went to answer. Deputy Miller stood on the porch, looking uncomfortable. Evening, Lawson, Miss Kane. What can we do for you, Deputy? Lucas asked, his posture alert. Sheriff sent me to fetch you both, Miller said, avoiding their eyes. Says he needs to see you at his office right away. Katherine moved to stand beside Lucas. What about? Miller shrugged. Didn't say, just told me to bring you. Lucas and Katherine exchanged concerned glances. After a moment's hesitation, Lucas nodded. We'll come, just give us a minute. When the deputy stepped back outside, Lucas turned to Katherine. We don't have to go. Yes, we do, Katherine replied pragmatically. If we don't, he'll just send more men or come himself. Better to find out what he wants. Lucas nodded grimly. Stay close to me. The walk to the sheriff's office was tense, with Deputy Miller leading the way and Lucas and Katherine following hand in hand. The streets were quiet, most of Copper Creek's residents already home for supper or at the saloon for evening drinks. The sheriff's office was lit by several oil lamps, casting long shadows across the walls. Sheriff Dawson sat behind his desk, a self-satisfied smile playing at his lips as they entered. Ah, the happy couple, he said, leaning back in his chair. Thank you for joining me. What do you want, Dawson? Lucas asked, his voice clipped. So impatient, Dawson tusked, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. Have a seat, this might take a while. We'll stand, Katherine said firmly. Dawson shrugged. Suit yourselves. He opened a drawer and pulled out a telegram, holding it up so they could see the yellow paper. Interesting message came in today from the marshal's office in Denver. Katherine felt Lucas tense beside her. What about? He asked, his face carefully neutral. About you, Lawson, Dawson replied, savoring the moment. Seems you're wanted for questioning in connection with a stage robbery near Pueblo last year. 2 men dead. Katherine gasped, turning to Lucas. That's not possible. Lucas's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. It's a lie. I was nowhere near Pueblo last year. The telegram says otherwise, Dawson countered. Says a man matching your description was identified by a witness. He stood, circling the desk to stand in front of them. Now, I have a duty to hold you until the marshal can come collect you. That could take weeks, given the weather turning. You know damn well I had nothing to do with any robbery, Lucas growled, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Do I? Dawson raised an eyebrow. A drifter with a history of gambling and fighting shows up in my town, starts causing trouble. Seems pretty clear to me. This is about my property, isn't it? Katherine said suddenly, the pieces falling into place. You fabricated this whole thing to get Lucas out of the way. Dawson's smile turned cold. Careful, Miss Kane, that's a serious accusation against an officer of the law. He turned his attention back to Lucas. Now, are you going to come quietly, or do we need to do this the hard way? Lucas looked ready to fight, his body coiled with tension. Katherine squeezed his hand, silently urging caution. They were outnumbered, and violence would only make things worse. Lucas, don't, she whispered. After a moment of internal struggle, Lucas gave an almost imperceptible nod. I'll come peacefully, he told Dawson, but this isn't over. Oh, I think it is, Dawson replied, signaling to Deputy Miller to take Lucas's gun. Katherine, you're free to go for now. Lucas turned to Katherine, his eyes intense. Don't worry, he said quietly. The truth will come out, I promise you. Katherine fought back tears as Deputy Miller led Lucas to the cell at the back of the office. I'll find a way to help you, she promised. Dawson watched the exchange with amusement. How touching. As Katherine turned to leave, he added, By the way, Miss Kane, my offer on your property still stands, though given your association with a suspected murderer, the price has dropped considerably. $200 seems fair now. Katherine straightened her spine, anger burning through her fear. Not even if it was the last piece of land on earth, Sheriff. Dawson's smile never wavered. We'll see how you feel after a few weeks with your cowboy locked up and your reputation in tatters. Good evening, Miss Kane. Katherine left the sheriff's office with her head high, though her heart was breaking. Outside, she paused to gather her thoughts. She refused to believe Lucas was guilty of the crimes Dawson alleged. The timing was too convenient, the sheriff's smug certainty too practiced. But proving Lucas's innocence would be no easy task, especially with Dawson controlling the information coming in and out of town. Katherine needed allies, people who would stand with her against the sheriff's corruption. As she walked home through the darkening streets, a plan began to form in her mind. It would be dangerous, and success was far from guaranteed. But for Lucas, for the future they had just begun to dream of together, Katherine was willing to take the risk. The next morning, Katherine rose before dawn, her determination having hardened overnight into resolve. She dressed quickly and made her way through the silent streets to Mrs. Bennett's general store. The older woman had given Katherine a key years ago, trusting her to open the store on days when Mrs. Bennett's arthritis was particularly troublesome. Inside, Katherine lit a single lamp and went straight to the back room where the telegraph was located. Mrs. Bennett was one of the few people in town, besides Sheriff Dawson, who had access to a telegraph, using it to order supplies from Denver and other larger towns. Katherine had watched Mrs. Bennett use the telegraph many times and had even sent a few messages herself when her employer was busy. Now, she carefully composed a message addressed to the U.S. But she couldn't stand by while Lucas was framed for crimes he didn't commit. After sending the telegram, Katherine carefully locked up the store again and hurried to the Foster ranch. The sun was just cresting the hills as she arrived, finding old Mr. Foster already in the barn tending to his horses. "Miss Kane," he said, surprised to see her. "What brings you out so early?" "It's about Lucas," Katherine said, quickly explaining the situation. Foster's weathered face darkened with concern. Dawson's had it in for that boy since day one, and these charges sound mighty convenient. "Exactly," Katherine agreed. "I've sent a telegram to Denver for verification, but I need your help too, Mr. Foster. Lucas said he was nowhere near Pueblo last year. Do you know where he might have been? Anything that could prove his whereabouts?" Foster thought for a moment. "He mentioned working for the Bar T outfit up Montana way last fall. Said he spent the winter there before heading south again in the spring." "The Bar T," Katherine repeated, committing the name to memory. "Thank you, Mr. Foster. One more thing, would you be willing to testify to Lucas's character if it comes to that?" Sheriff Dawson respects you, or at least he pretends to. You can count on me, Miss Kane, Foster assured her. Lawson's the best hand I've had in years. Honest, hardworking. No way he's mixed up in stage robberies and killings. Encouraged by Foster's support, Catherine's next stop was the church, where she found Reverend Simmons arranging hymnals for the upcoming Sunday service. Miss Kane, he greeted her warmly, what brings you to the Lord's house this morning? Catherine explained the situation once again, watching the Reverend's kindly face grow concerned. That doesn't sound like the young man I've come to know, he said when she finished. Lucas has attended services faithfully since arriving in town, and he's been generous with the poor box despite his modest means. Sheriff Dawson is trying to frame him to force me to sell my property, Catherine said bluntly. I need people who will stand with Lucas, people Dawson can't easily intimidate. Reverend Simmons nodded thoughtfully. The Lord calls us to stand for justice and truth. I'll speak with the sheriff today, and I'll rally the congregation to pray for Lucas. Thank you, Reverend, Catherine said gratefully. By midday, Catherine had spoken with several other townsfolk who had come to know and respect Lucas during his time in Copper Creek, Mr. Peterson the blacksmith, doctor. Wilson, who had treated Lucas for a minor injury at the ranch, even Mr. Harris from the Silver Dollar Saloon, who admitted that Lucas had never caused trouble despite plenty of opportunities. With each conversation, Catherine felt her hope growing. Dawson was powerful, but he wasn't invincible. If enough people stood together against his corruption, they might have a chance. Her final stop was the jailhouse itself, where she hoped to speak with Lucas. Deputy Miller was on duty, looking uncomfortable as she entered. I'd like to see Mr. Lawson, Catherine said firmly. Miller hesitated. Sheriff Dawson said no visitors. Deputy, Catherine said, lowering her voice, you know this isn't right. Lucas hasn't even had a proper hearing. At least let me speak to him briefly. Miller glanced toward the cells at the back of the office, then at the door. After a moment's indecision, he nodded. 5 minutes. If the sheriff comes back, I never let you in. Thank you, Catherine said sincerely, hurrying past him to the cells. Lucas was sitting on a narrow cot, his head in his hands. He looked up at the sound of her footsteps, his expression brightening instantly. Catherine, he said, moving to the bars that separated them. You shouldn't be here. I had to see you, she replied, reaching through the bars to touch his face. Are you all right? Lucas caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. I'm fine. Worried about you, though. Dawson won't take kindly to you helping me. Let me worry about Dawson, Catherine said determinedly. I've sent a telegram to the marshal's office in Denver to verify these supposed charges against you. And I've been talking to people in town, gathering support. Lucas's eyes widened. Catherine, that's dangerous. If Dawson finds out, he can't intimidate the entire town, Catherine interrupted. Mr. Foster believes in you, so does Reverend Simmons and others. We're going to prove your innocence. Lucas's expression softened. You're incredible, you know that. He reached through the bars to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. But I don't want you putting yourself at risk for me. It's not just for you, Catherine replied honestly. It's for us. For what we could have together. She hesitated, then added, Lucas, where were you last fall? Mr. Foster mentioned the Bar T Ranch in Montana. Lucas nodded. That's right. I was there from August through April working their winter herd. The owner's name is Thomas Barrett. He'll vouch for me. I'll send another telegram, Catherine promised. We'll clear your name. Time's up, Deputy Miller called nervously from the front of the office. Catherine squeezed Lucas's hand. I'll be back as soon as I can. Be careful, Lucas urged. Dawson's dangerous when he's cornered. So am I, Catherine replied with a small smile. Keep your spirits up, you're not alone in this. As she left the jailhouse, Catherine spotted Sheriff Dawson across the street, watching her with narrowed eyes. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated, before continuing on her way to Mrs. Bennett's store. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Catherine divided her time between her jobs and her efforts to help Lucas. Mrs. Bennett, upon learning what Catherine had done with the telegraph, had fully supported her, even sending additional messages on Catherine's behalf. That Dawson's been a thorn in this town's side for too long. the older woman declared. About time someone stood up to him. 4 days after Lucas's arrest, the reply came from Denver. Katherine Kane stopped no record of Lucas Lawson wanted for stage robbery, stopped no matching description in wanted circulars, stop request Sheriff Dawson, provide specifics of alleged crime and source of information, stop Marshal Thompson Denver, stop. Katherine's hands shook with relief and vindication as she read the telegram. "I knew it," she told Mrs. Bennett. "Dawson made it all up." A second telegram arrived later that day from the Bar T Ranch in Montana. Lucas Lawson employed Bar T Ranch August to April last year. Stop excellent hand, stop present during alleged robbery, stop willing to provide sworn statement, stop Thomas Barrett owner, stop armed with this evidence. Katherine marched to Reverend Simmons's house, where she found him in conversation with several prominent citizens of Copper Creek, including Mr. Foster, Dr. Wilson, and surprisingly, Judge Parker, who presided over the territorial court and was visiting his daughter in town. "Miss Kane," the Reverend greeted her, "I was just telling these gentlemen about your concerns regarding Mr. Lawson's detention." Judge Parker, a stern-looking man with a shock of white hair, studied Katherine with interest. "Reverend Simmons speaks highly of both you and this cowboy, Miss Kane. I find it troubling that Sheriff Dawson has detained someone without formal charges or evidence." Katherine presented the telegrams, explaining their significance. "Sheriff Dawson fabricated these charges to pressure me into selling my property, Your Honor. Lucas is innocent, and these messages prove it." Judge Parker read the telegrams carefully, his expression growing more severe with each line. "This is a serious matter," he said finally. "Abuse of power, false imprisonment, possibly extortion." He looked up at Katherine. "Are you willing to make a formal statement against Sheriff Dawson?" "Yes, Your Honor," Katherine said without hesitation, "and I believe others in town will do the same." Judge Parker nodded grimly. "Then let's put an end to this. Reverend, gather as many concerned citizens as you can. Mr. Foster, Dr. Wilson, I'll need your statements as well. We'll convene at the jailhouse in 1 hour." As word spread through Copper Creek, people began gathering in front of the sheriff's office. By the time Judge Parker arrived, nearly half the town was present: shopkeepers, ranchers, saloon girls, even the schoolteacher and her pupils. Inside, they found Sheriff Dawson seated behind his desk, visibly startled by the crowd entering his office. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded, rising to his feet. Judge Parker stepped forward, his authority evident in his bearing. "Sheriff Dawson, I've received evidence that you've detained Lucas Lawson under false pretenses. I have telegrams from the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver confirming that there are no outstanding warrants for his arrest." Dawson's face reddened. "There must be some mistake." "My information, your information, was fabricated," Katherine interrupted, unable to contain herself. "Just like your claims that Lucas had a checkered past in Colorado." "Sheriff," Judge Parker continued, "I'm ordering you to release Mr. Lawson immediately. Furthermore, I'm opening an investigation into your conduct as sheriff of this county. There have been numerous allegations of intimidation, corruption, and abuse of power." Dawson looked around the room, seeing the determined faces of the townsfolk he had bullied for so long. For the first time, Katherine saw fear in his eyes. "This is ridiculous," he blustered. "You can't just—" "I can and I am," Judge Parker said firmly. "Deputy Miller, release Mr. Lawson. Sheriff Dawson, consider yourself suspended pending investigation." Deputy Miller hurried to comply, clearly relieved to be following orders from someone other than Dawson. A moment later, Lucas emerged from the cells, looking surprised and confused by the crowd waiting for him. His eyes found Katherine immediately, and the smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He crossed to her side, taking her hand in his. "What did you do?" he asked softly. "What you would have done for me," Katherine replied simply. As Judge Parker continued explaining the charges being brought against Dawson, Lucas leaned down to whisper in Katherine's ear. "Have I told you lately that I love you, Katherine Kane?" Katherine smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting. "Not in the last few days, no." Well, I do, Lucas said firmly. More than ever. I love you too, Katherine whispered back. And I'm not letting you out of my sight again anytime soon. Outside the jailhouse, as the townsfolk celebrated Lucas's release and Dawson's downfall, Lucas pulled Katherine aside to a quiet spot beneath the old oak tree in the town square. I've been doing a lot of thinking in that cell, he said, taking both her hands in his. About what? Katherine asked, still giddy with relief and happiness. About us, about what I want for our future. Lucas took a deep breath. Katherine, when I thought I might lose you, it nearly broke me. I don't want to waste another day not being with you. Before Katherine realized what was happening, Lucas was down on one knee, looking up at her with all the love in the world shining in his eyes. I don't have a ring yet, he said apologetically, but I have my heart and it's yours completely. Katherine Kane, will you marry me? Tears of joy sprang to Katherine's eyes. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, Lucas, yes, I will marry you. Lucas rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly, heedless of the cheers and whistles from the townsfolk who had noticed their moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and beaming, Katherine saw Mrs. Bennet wiping away tears, Reverend Simmons smiling broadly, and Mr. Foster giving them a thumbs up. Looks like we have the town's blessing, Lucas said with a laugh. We earned it, Katherine replied, nestling into his embrace. Together. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change for Copper Creek. Judge Parker appointed Deputy Miller as interim sheriff while formal proceedings against Dawson moved forward. With evidence provided by multiple townspeople, including Katherine, Lucas, and even Mr. Harris from the saloon, Dawson was charged with multiple counts of corruption, intimidation, and abuse of power. He was transported to Cheyenne to await trial, his influence in Copper Creek finally broken. Meanwhile, Lucas moved his few belongings from the Foster Ranch into Katherine's cabin, with the Reverend's blessing and Mrs. Bennet acting as a nominal chaperone until their wedding. Together, they began making plans for their future, expanding the cabin, adding to Katherine's garden, perhaps even starting a small horse breeding operation on the adjacent land that Dawson had coveted for so long. The Harvest Festival at the end of October became an impromptu engagement celebration, with the entire town turning out to wish the happy couple well. Reverend Simmons announced their wedding date the first Saturday in December, just before Christmas, and there wasn't a dry eye in the church. As winter approached, bringing the first dusting of snow to Copper Creek, Katherine and Lucas sat together on their porch swing, wrapped in a quilt against the evening chill. Happy? Lucas asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. Katherine leaned her head against him, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Perfectly, she replied, though I keep thinking about how close we came to losing this if you hadn't been in the saloon that night. Lucas tightened his arm around her. But I was. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. No more flames near her, Katherine quoted softly. That's what you said to Dawson, Lucas smiled, remembering. I couldn't stand by and watch him hurt you. Something in me just snapped. You saved me, Katherine said simply. Not just from the flame, but from a life of fear. You gave me courage to stand up to Dawson, to fight for what was right. We saved each other, Lucas corrected gently. You gave me a reason to stop drifting, to put down roots. You made me believe I deserved a second chance. Katherine turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. We did, didn't we, save each other? And we'll keep doing it, Lucas promised, every day for the rest of our lives. As their lips met in a tender kiss, snowflakes began to fall, dusting their hair and shoulders with winter's first blessing. Neither noticed, two wrapped up in each other and the promise of their future together, a future built on courage, trust, and a love that had begun with a simple act of protection. No more flames near her. A year later, on a crisp autumn evening much like the one when they'd first met, Katherine and Lucas sat on their expanded porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The cabin had grown along with their dreams, a new room added for the baby due in spring. A small stable for the horses Lucas was training, a workshop where Katherine crafted furniture from her father's old tools. In her lap lay a letter from Judge Parker, bearing the news that former Sheriff Dawson had been sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison for his crimes. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked, noticing the contemplative look on his wife's face. Katherine smiled, placing a hand over her growing belly where their child shifted and kicked. "I'm thinking about flames." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Flames, how they can destroy," Katherine explained, "but also how they can forge something stronger. Like us. Dawson meant to break us, but instead he tempered us." Lucas took her hand, pressing a kiss to her wedding ring, the gold band he'd saved for months to buy her. From the ashes, something beautiful grew. "Something beautiful indeed," Katherine agreed, leaning into her husband's embrace as the first star appeared in the twilight sky. Together they watched night fall over Copper Creek, their town, their home. The place where a cowboy had said no more flames near her, and changed both their lives forever.